I found myself alone with my little brother, and I proposed to him, a tale of betrayal. Have you ever experienced a moment that seizes your very essence and won't release its grip? A moment so profound, so unforeseen, that it transforms everything you believed you understood about your very essence. For me, it was that night. Isn't it curious how the tapestry of life unfolds? In the stillness of life, when the world feels mundane and unremarkable, it is often these very moments that etch themselves into our memories, lingering long after they've passed. On that night, it was only my little brother and me, together in our own little world. The house lay in quietude. Save for the gentle hum of the fridge in the kitchen, and the sporadic creak of the floorboards beneath our feet, as we wandered through its stillness. It was one of those nights when the outside world seemed distant, as if nothing existed beyond the confines of the four walls surrounding you. Yet, within that silence an event unfolded. As fate would have it, I stepped into that night unaware of the transformation that awaited me. That morning, I rose without a hint of the tale I would share with you. A tale that still grips my heart with its intensity. Yet, life often surprises us with unexpected twists when we are least prepared for them. It began with the most unassuming of beginnings. He approached me with a request, a simple one, something that would have seemed trivial on any ordinary day. Yet, there was an essence in the way he expressed it, a nuance in his tone, a glimmer in his eyes. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was something within me, too, that felt distinct on that day. Oh, how I long to share with you that I am at a loss for words about it. Yet, if I'm speaking truthfully, if I'm laying it all bare, it wasn't solely him. It was I as well. For what felt like an eternity, I had been drifting through life, unseen and unnoticed. Have you ever experienced something like that? As if you can feel the presence, yet remain just outside its grasp. People may perceive your exterior, yet they remain unaware of the depths within. It feels as though you're calling out, yearning for someone to see you, yet the world continues to rush by, oblivious to your presence. I suppose I was unaware of the depth of my solitude. Of the yearning I felt to be acknowledged, to have my voice resonate. And perhaps, in a peculiar fashion, I believed that night would somehow bridge that emptiness. In my mind's eye, I can see myself nestled on the couch, the flickering light of the TV dancing across the walls, creating a tapestry of shadows that whispered stories of their own. He sat opposite me, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the dim light, and there was an energy in the air, something unspoken yet palpable. I attempted to cast it aside, to dismiss it from my mind, yet it lingered. Persistent and undeniable. And the harder I attempted to convince myself it wasn't real, the more it enveloped me. I find myself endlessly revisiting that moment in my mind. The subtle tremor in his voice as he spoke, a delicate crack that hinted at deeper emotions. The way my heart danced, not from fear, but from a different kind of thrill. There was a truth I hesitated to acknowledge within my own heart. It's astonishing how swiftly events can unfold, how rapidly boundaries can fade away. And now, each time I reflect on that night, I find myself pondering, was it truly me? Could it have been him? Or was it merely life guiding us to a place where we were never meant to be? One thing is certain. That night transformed everything. It transformed us. Should you ever find yourself poised at the brink of a decision you never anticipated facing, then you understand precisely what I mean. Ah. That sensation, it resonates, doesn't it? That tug, that longing, that struggle within your mind that refuses to fade. Cease, regardless of the effort you put forth to hush it. Before we embark on this journey, I have a question to pose to you. Do you think that a single moment can shape everything? That single night has the power to transform everything? Who are you? For all eternity. Stay with me, for this tale is one I never imagined I would unveil. Yet, I feel the moment has come. Prepare to embark on a journey through the profound depths of human emotion. Subscribe now. Embark on an adventure that promises to captivate your imagination. Allow me to transport you to the very moment when it all started. To truly grasp the essence of that night. I seek to uncover the chapters of my existence, to understand the essence of who I truly am. At the age of 28, I found myself in the bonds of marriage. Yet I felt an overwhelming sense of solitude that I had never experienced before. Isn't it amusing? How one can share a house, a bed, even a life with someone and still feel like an apparition gliding silently through the familiar halls of your own abode. My husband, Peter, was not a bad man. He toiled diligently, ensured our needs were met, and kept the bills in check. Yet, at some point in our journey, the bond that once united us began to dissolve into the ether. It felt as though one were attempting to grasp onto wisps of smoke. It eluded my grasp, slipping away no matter how fiercely I clutched at it. He rarely graced the home with his presence. And when he did, it seemed as though his thoughts wandered far beyond the walls that surrounded him. Work, his phone, the TV, it was all inconsequential. To him, the world around him held far more intrigue than I ever could. As I settled into my seat at the dinner table, I endeavored to weave a tapestry of conversation. Yet all I received in return were distracted nods and half-hearted hums, like whispers lost in the wind. It was as if I were fading away, fragment by fragment. And so we come to James. My younger brother. Charming, light-hearted James. At 21, he was 7 years my junior, yet in many respects, he carried himself with the wisdom of an older sibling. He possessed a unique ability to envelop others in a sense of security, as if the world outside could never reach them while he stood by their side. James had consistently been my steadfast support, particularly in the challenging moments. As Peter began to slip into the shadows, it was James who first caught the subtle shift. He would reach out to see how I was doing, show up unexpectedly with my favorite treats, or simply share a quiet moment with me when words fell short. He had a remarkable way of making you feel acknowledged, even when everyone else seemed to overlook your presence. On that night, it was simply the two of us. Once more, Peter had ventured out of town for work, leaving me in the company of James, who had graciously come over to keep me company. It was not out of the ordinary. He frequently engaged in this, particularly when he was aware that solitude would be my companion. The evening's weather mirrored my mood, gray, heavy, and restless, as if the sky itself shared in my unease. A storm was rolling in, the kind that charged the air with a palpable energy. Thick and electric, as if the world itself held its breath in anticipation. The rain began as a gentle drizzle, a soft tapping against the windows, but by the time James arrived, it had transformed into a torrential downpour. With him present, the house embraced a warmth that wrapped around like a familiar blanket. As we nestled into the living room, the soft glow of the table lamp painted warm shadows that danced upon the walls. The television murmured softly in the background, yet neither of us truly paid it any mind. James lay sprawled on the couch, his feet resting comfortably on the coffee table, appearing as calm and at ease. There I sat, nestled in the cozy embrace of the armchair opposite him. A soft blanket wrapped around my legs, creating a warm cocoon. It wrapped around me like a warm embrace, a sense of belonging that whispered of safety. Yet, beneath that soothing facade, an unspoken tension lingered, something elusive that I couldn't quite grasp. I wished to acknowledge within myself. We began our conversation, as we often did, meandering through the realms of the mundane and the profound. His work, my day, echoes of our childhood adventures. James possessed a remarkable ability to transform even the simplest subjects into captivating tales, as if he truly valued every word I shared. Yet, as the dialogue unfolded, and I began to observe details, subtle nuances that I would typically overlook. The way his gaze held mine, a heartbeat longer than it should have. The manner in which his voice took on a gentle quality when he uttered my name. The way he chuckled at my tales, even those that fell flat. And then, there was I. I chuckled a bit more heartily, drew in a tad nearer, and allowed my gaze to dance toward him more frequently than was perhaps appropriate. It began as a mere coincidence, not by design, at least not in the beginning. Yet, as the tempest howled beyond the walls, a palpable change enveloped the space between us. The rain fell fiercely, drumming against the windows as if it were desperate to break through. In the distance, thunder rumbled ominously, and every now and then, a brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the room, casting fleeting shadows that danced across the walls. Divide, pause. Then immerse it once more into the depths of darkness. It's hard to say whether it was the tempest raging outside, the rich wine swirling in our glasses, or the long absence of feeling truly acknowledged, but something was stirring within me. The atmosphere surrounding us crackled with energy, reminiscent of the electric tension in the air. Before a flash of brilliance illuminated the sky. At one moment, James rose to replenish our glasses. As he strolled by, the warmth of his presence brushed against me, carrying with it the subtle hint of his cologne. My heart raced, and I loathed myself for feeling that way. I whispered to myself that it was nothing, merely a figment of my creativity. Yet, as he settled back down, drawing nearer this time, our knees touched ever so gently, and I found myself staying right where I was. I was unable to. Our conversation flowed on. Yet the significance of the words had faded into the background. The quiet moments shared, the glances exchanged, the lingering pauses, and the unvoiced tension spoke volumes. I stood at the precipice, gazing into the abyss below, aware that what lay hidden would transform my world forever if I took that fateful plunge. James must have sensed it as well, for he paused in the midst of their words and turned their gaze toward me, truly seeing me. His eyes roamed, filled with curiosity and inquiry, as though he lingered on the edge of anticipation, hoping for a sign from me. And for a fleeting moment, I pondered the idea of bringing it all to a halt. I considered chuckling it away, crafting a reason to exit the room. Anything to shatter the enchantment that had ensnared us. Yet, I chose not to. Instead, I allowed the moment to stretch and breathe. I allowed myself to be swept away by it. And somewhere, deep within, I sensed that there was no way to return. Reflecting on those moments, I find myself wishing I could claim ignorance, that I was taken by surprise, unprepared for what lay ahead. Ah! But what of the truth? I witnessed it unfold. I experienced it. I allowed it to unfold. And that's the piece that lingers in my thoughts long after the day has ended. If you find yourself still present, if you've ever experienced a moment when every fiber of your being urged you to halt, yet you pressed on, then you will be eager to hear the continuation of this tale. For that night held more tales to unfold. It was merely the dawn of a new chapter. Ah, the beauty of moments like these. They unfold gradually, one moment at a time. It's a gradual unfolding, a series of subtle hints that weave together over time. It's a journey of subtle, nearly imperceptible strides that leads you beyond the horizons you once envisioned. It began with a question, one so simple, so innocent, that I nearly overlooked the profound significance it held. Have you ever sensed that you fall short of what you aspire to be? His voice was soft, as if he were uncertain whether he wished for me to catch his words. Yet, there was an essence in his words. A raw openness that compelled me to pause and truly see him. What do you mean? I inquired, striving to maintain a cheerful demeanor, despite the weight in my chest. Secured. James paused, his gaze darting momentarily before locking onto mine once more. I'm uncertain. Regardless of your efforts, it seems they never quite satisfy those who hold the most significance in your life. The words struck me with the force of a sudden blow, leaving me breathless. He was weaving a narrative that extended beyond his own experiences. He was weaving a tale about me. James, I began. Yet the words eluded me, leaving me in a moment of uncertainty. What tale could I weave? That I understood precisely what he was experiencing. That I had poured months, years into a silent abyss, yearning for a soul to truly listen to my cries. He offered a faint, melancholic smile, as if he was already aware of the unfolding tale. "It's all right," he murmured gently. "Silence speaks volumes. I suppose I believed you would grasp it." And in that moment I took the leap. Following that moment, the ambience within the room shifted dramatically. It lacked any sense of drama. There were no grand proclamations or abrupt gestures. Yet there existed an unspoken bond that lingered softly in the atmosphere surrounding us. As we began to explore other topics, the essence of our dialogue shifted, carrying a new weight. Wider horizons await. Rawer. Each word held a hidden weight, a silent truth that lingered between us, unacknowledged and untouched by our lips. At one point, James leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together as if cradling something delicate. "You know, I've always admired you," he said. "Once upon a time, in our childhood days, you possessed an unwavering strength, a confidence that radiated from within. It seems I've never shared that with you before." His words swept me away unexpectedly. Once upon a time, there was a character named James. "I am not strong," I replied, shaking my head. "At times, it seems as though I am unraveling piece by piece." He gazed at me then, truly gazed, and within his eyes lay a spark that seized my breath. "Perhaps that is the reason you are powerful," he declared. "For you persist, even in moments when it seems impossible to continue." The earnestness in his voice, the way he appeared to peer directly into my soul, it was overwhelming. I averted my eyes, feigning an adjustment of the blanket draped across my lap, yet I sensed his gaze still resting upon me. The rain outside had escalated into a fierce tempest, the wind wailing against the windows. While the thunder roared so powerfully it felt as though it might rattle the very walls themselves. It seemed as though the house was a unique realm, isolated from all that surrounds it. In that fleeting instant, it was simply the two of us, suspended in time. Uncertain whether it was the tempest outside, the cozy embrace of the room, or the rare sensation of being truly acknowledged after such a long time, I found myself beginning to lower my defenses. We began to weave tales of our childhood memories. Oh, the delightful moments, like that time he attempted to construct a treehouse and found himself tumbling into a soft heap of leaves. Or that unforgettable summer we spent stealthily slipping into the neighbor's pool when they were away. We shared a laugh, and for a fleeting moment, everything felt just right. Cozy. Yet, beneath the mirth, a different essence lingered. A tension that lingered between us, unspoken and heavy, like a shadow we both felt but dared not acknowledge. In a fleeting moment, James extended his hand to retrieve his glass from the coffee table, and our fingers briefly intertwined. It was but a whisper of contact, a mere instant, yet it coursed through me like a spark. I withdrew my hand swiftly, yet not before I caught a glimpse of the flicker in his eyes, the subtle movement of his lips. He opened his mouth as if to share a thought, but then hesitated, holding back the words that lingered on the tip of his tongue. The gaze in his eyes contained a depth I hadn't anticipated, an emotion I found difficult to comprehend. It was not long after that when the tale unfolded. In that dim light, we found ourselves nestled together, while the storm unleashed its fury outside, making the world seem smaller and more hushed than it ever should have been. James turned to me, his expression a mystery waiting to be unraveled. "May I pose a question to you?" He spoke. With a moment of uncertainty, my heart raced within me. "Certainly," I replied, striving to maintain a calm tone. He inhaled deeply, his eyes locked onto mine. "Do you find joy in your heart?" The question struck me with the force of a sudden revelation. I parted my lips to respond, yet silence enveloped me. Did joy fill my heart? How might I become? My marriage resembled a hollow shell. Each day steeped in a quiet ache that lingered, refusing to fade away. I don't know, I said at last, my voice scarcely rising above a whisper. James nodded. As if he had been anticipating that response all along. You are worthy of it, he murmured gently. And then, in a moment of impulse, before I could gather my thoughts or hold back, I uttered the words that would alter the course of everything. I'm not sure I can recall what that sensation is like these days. The hush that enveloped the room was overwhelming. And then James reached out, his hand brushing against mine once more, yet this time he lingered, not pulling away. This time, I too remained silent. As James' hand brushed against mine, a chill swept through me, freezing a moment that felt suspended in time. Not merely my body, but my thoughts, my breath, my sense of reason, each element held in a single, electrifying moment. As if time itself had paused to witness the unfolding of this experience. It could have been so simple to step back, to chuckle it away, to distance ourselves, to pretend as if nothing was unfolding. And yet, I chose not to. Instead, I lingered there, my hand resting beneath his, while my thoughts danced in a whirlwind of 100 different directions. What was I up to? What was he up to? And why, despite the turmoil within me insisting that this was wrong, did it feel so undeniably right? For what felt like an eternity, I wandered through my existence a mere specter. Slipping through the fabric of my own reality, unnoticed and silent. Peter had grown distant, his gaze no longer lingering on me as it once did. I was the one he returned to, the heart of the home. Ensuring that there was nourishment on the table and fresh garments in the closet. Yet, in addition to that, I simply existed in that moment. For months, no, years, I had woven a tale in my mind. Convincing myself that it simply didn't matter. Being a devoted wife, a true partner, revolves around the essence of sacrifice, where one places the needs of another above their own. In that moment, with James sitting so close that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, I came to a profound realization about the extent of the lies I had been telling myself. I yearned for recognition. I yearned to experience the thrill of being wanted, to hold significance, to truly feel vibrant and full of life. And for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, someone was stirring those feelings within me. Yet, it was far from ordinary. It was James. 100 thoughts surged through my mind, each one clamoring for attention. Growing louder and more insistent than the last. It's nothing to worry about, I reassured myself. It's merely a fleeting instant. A bond. Isn't it true that connection is essential for survival? I endeavored to persuade myself that all was well in this situation. In that moment, I found myself yearning for solace, and there was James, with his gentle heart and nurturing spirit, extending it to me. Yet, beneath the surface, I held a different truth. In that moment, I realized the way my heart raced when he gazed at me was more than mere comfort. The warmth flooding my cheeks whenever his hand grazed mine was anything but innocent. And I realized that if I allowed this to unfold any further, there would be no way to return. Guilt started to seep in, enveloping me like a dense, suffocating mist. This was not right. I was aware it was not right. James was my little brother. The one who had stood by my side through every storm, the one who placed his trust in me, who admired me. And here I found myself, enveloped in shadows. Allowing emotions I couldn't even identify to draw me into a realm I couldn't articulate. What sort of individual engages in such behavior? Yet, amidst the gnawing guilt that gripped my heart, another voice stirred within me. My mind. What is your tale? It murmured softly. When was the last time someone truly listened to your needs? What emotions stirred within you? You've devoted so much time to others, why not allow yourself to receive something just for you? Only this time. That voice held a perilous allure. It was the whisper of every desire I had ever turned away from. Every urge I had ever held back. And the harder I attempted to cast it aside, the more it echoed in my mind. I cast a sideways look at James, and a knot formed in my stomach. In his gaze, there lingered a blend of concern, curiosity, and an elusive emotion that danced just beyond my understanding. "Are you all right?" he inquired. The voice was gentle, carrying a hint of uncertainty. I nodded swiftly, perhaps a bit too swiftly. "Indeed," I replied, though my voice trembled slightly. "I'm doing well." Yet, I was far from fine. I found myself in a state far from fine. In that fleeting moment, my mind was consumed by how near he stood. How simple it could be to bridge the distance that lies between us. How his hand still lingered gently against mine, as if he were poised, anticipating whether I would retreat or draw closer. I felt the urge to distance myself. I sought to bring this to a close before it unraveled into something irreversible. Yet, I yearned to remain. I yearned to grasp that fleeting moment. To allow myself to believe, if only for a brief time, that there was a presence of concern. That someone noticed my presence. The two desires clashed within me, ripping me asunder. And the most challenging aspect, I found myself unable to discern which contender was emerging victorious. "It's merely the wine," I reassured myself, even as I recognized the truth lurking beneath that facade. "It's the tempest, the twilight hour, the isolation." Yet, none of those justifications could unveil the reason behind the thunderous rhythm of my heart, or why I found myself utterly captivated by him. James shifted slightly, his knee brushing against mine, and in that moment, it felt as if a spark had ignited something deep within. "Deep within me, I wish for you to escape this feeling," he said suddenly, his voice shattering the stillness. "As if you stand in solitude. You are not. You have yet to experience it." His words flowed effortlessly, yet they crashed over me like a tidal wave. For the reality was, I truly felt isolated. More isolated than I had ever experienced. In that moment, as the storm howled outside and the room pulsed with a quiet, electric tension, I came to a realization I had been reluctant to face. Loneliness had become a heavy cloak I no longer wished to wear. As I inhaled deeply, my mind swirled with a tumult of thoughts and feelings. This was it, the moment where everything could change. It was a pivotal moment. Standing at the crossroads of retreating into the familiar embrace of my guilt, or daring to plunge into the vast expanse of the unknown. James's gaze locked onto mine, and in that moment, I understood he was poised, anticipating what would come next. For my journey. Seeking a sign. For a tale yet to unfold. As I lingered in that stillness, time seemed to pause. And I could sense the heavy burden of every decision I had ever faced bearing down upon me. Uncertainty loomed over me, leaving me in suspense about what would unfold next. I was uncertain whether this choice would lead to regret, if it would break apart everything I knew, or if it would piece me back together once more. All I felt was an undeniable fracture within me. An unraveling I couldn't halt. I was reluctant to bring it to an end. But then, James spoke once more, and his next words transformed everything. In that instant, it dawned on me that my decision had already been made. When James uttered those words, "You don't have to do this alone anymore," I sensed my determination shatter in a manner that was nearly perceptible. The words resonated throughout the room, reverberating off the walls and finding their way into the hidden recesses of my thoughts. But what could he have meant? Was he weaving a tale of loneliness, of isolation? Or was there an additional layer in his voice, something deeper? I was at a loss. And perhaps, just perhaps, I wished to remain in the shadows of uncertainty. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension, yet James, in his own unique manner, sought to ease it. With a flick of his wrist, he grasped the remote and began to navigate the sea of channels. Finally settling on a nostalgic comedy show that had once filled our childhood with laughter. "Do you recall this?" He spoke with a grin, his eyes sparkling with mischief. This was something we often referenced. A smile crept across my face, a wave of gratitude washing over me for the welcome distraction. Indeed, it lingers in my mind. Oh. How you believed you were the life of the party, attempting to bring those characters to life with your playful imitations. I was funny, he declared, feigning offense with a playful glint in his eye. You simply failed to recognize my brilliance. I chuckled, a genuine laugh this time, and for a fleeting moment, everything seemed to fall back into place. Yet, amidst our laughter and playful banter, a subtle tension lingered, an unspoken truth that neither of us dared to acknowledge. In a moment suspended in time, as we both reached for the bowl of popcorn, our fingers gently brushed against one another. It was a tiny detail. A fleeting moment that would have slipped away unnoticed on any other day. But now it felt alive, like the crackling energy of static electricity dancing between us. James lingered, his hand resting in place, and I found myself doing the same. In that moment time stood still, we were suspended in a delicate dance, our fingers almost brushing. Our gazes entwined in an unspoken connection. My breath caught in my throat, and I noticed the same uncertainty, the same unspoken question, reflected in his eyes that echoed the thoughts swirling in my own mind. The moment slipped away in an instant, far too fleeting, and James withdrew, clearing his throat as he did so. Apologies escaped his lips, his gaze fixed on the palms of his hands. Yet, the sensation remained, echoing in the silence long after the contact had faded. The tempest beyond the walls intensified, the wind wailing as if it bore a dire message, while the rain beat relentlessly upon the glass, a symphony of nature's fury. Within those walls, the atmosphere was thick, as if it were wrapping itself tightly around us. Each look exchanged between us carried a weight of unspoken words. Each word held a significance that resonated deeply within me. And still, we continued our conversation, maintaining the facade that all was well. James inquired about Peter, curious about the state of our relationship. I paused before responding, a tightness gripping my throat. At last, I uttered, "It's all right. All is well with us." James arched an eyebrow, a flicker of intrigue dancing in his gaze. All right. That doesn't seem very persuasive. I turned my eyes elsewhere, unable to confront his stare. It's a tangled web, I confessed. James remained quiet, yet his silence conveyed a powerful message. At some moment, almost without our awareness, we found ourselves drawing nearer to one another. Curled up in the armchair, I found myself leaning forward, my elbows resting on my knees. James had nestled into the corner of the couch, his form angled toward me, his knee nearly grazing mine. The distance that separated us seemed to shrink, enveloping us in a cocoon of closeness. The warmth of his presence enveloped me, his energy drawing me closer with an irresistible force. May I pose a question to you? James interjected, shattering the stillness that enveloped them. Indeed, I replied, my voice scarcely rising above a whisper. What keeps you here? The question struck me with the force of a sudden revelation. I understood the question he posed. The reason behind my choice to remain in a marriage that left me feeling hollow, invisible. I don't know, I said finally, my voice quivering with uncertainty. Perhaps it's simply more convenient to stay put, wouldn't you say? For I am uncertain of my identity without it. James extended his hand, letting it rest gently upon mine. You're so much more than that, he murmured gently. You are a tapestry woven with your own dreams and aspirations, far beyond the role of a partner. His words wove a spell around me, sending a shiver down my spine, and I could feel the sting of tears gathering at the corners of my eyes. I don't know who I am anymore, I confessed, my voice trembling with uncertainty. James' hold on my hand tightened, just a touch. Allow me to guide you on this journey of discovery. That was the moment when everything changed forever. It transcended the mere experience of solitude, or the yearning for recognition. It was a matter of profound significance, an essence that eluded my complete grasp. yet remained impossible to overlook. James was weaving a tapestry of solace for me. He was presenting himself to me. And the most chilling aspect. I felt a strong urge to seize it. The next time our hands met, it was no mere coincidence. I extended my hand, my fingertips lightly grazing his, and this time, I held my ground. He certainly did not. For a fleeting moment, we lingered in that space, our fingers woven together, while the tempest beyond slipped quietly into the shadows. It was a mere trifle, and yet it carried the weight of the world. In that instant, I realized we had ventured beyond a boundary. The atmosphere surrounding us was heavy with words left unsaid, filled with feelings we dared not express. Title. James leaned in. His gaze locked onto mine, and I could feel my heart racing so fiercely that I was convinced he could hear its frantic rhythm. "Shall I take my leave?" he inquired, his voice a mere whisper. "No," I replied swiftly. The word escaped my lips before I could catch it. James' gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment, the tension between us transformed into something entirely different. But then he reached up, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair away from my face, and in that moment, the tension snapped back into place, sharper and more intense than ever. We found ourselves at the brink of an act that sealed fate, a choice that could never be taken back. And yet, neither of us appeared capable of taking a step back. Instead, we drew nearer, the distance between us diminishing until it felt nearly erased. I could sense his breath on my skin, warm and calmly. I realized that if I didn't put an end to this at this moment, I would never find the courage to do so. Yet, I remained still. I was unable to. As James drew nearer, the space between us vanished. And I understood that the line we had been dancing around all night had finally vanished into the ether. We had traversed it. And thus, the path ahead was set, with no turning back. As James leaned in, the world around him faded, and time itself appeared to stretch, lingering in that charged instant. As the storm outside softened to a mere whisper, the lamp's flickering light danced gently, creating delicate shadows that played across the room. In that moment, the only sound that filled the air was the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat, echoing loudly in the stillness. Unyielding. The warmth of his breath danced against my skin, and for a brief moment, the thought of pulling away flickered in my mind. I reflected on the vows I had taken, the existence I had crafted. The line that, until this moment, I had always vowed I would never dare to cross. Yet, I remained still. I was unable to. In that moment, I felt the undeniable force drawing us together, the silent bond that had been weaving itself throughout the night, perhaps even for weeks. Even more extended. And then, in a twist of fate, it unfolded. James's lips hovered near mine, a whisper of contact, not quite a kiss, but a tantalizing promise of what was to come. Gentle, hesitant and quivering. And in that moment, a fragment of my very being broke apart. It felt as if the very walls I had constructed around my being, each excuse and every justification, were collapsing in a dramatic cascade. The burden of solitude, the shadows of neglect, and the silent anguish I had concealed within me surged forth, revealing an undeniable truth that could no longer be hidden. This was my desire. I desired him. My hand moved as if guided by an unseen force, reaching out to caress his face. My fingers quivering as they followed the contour of his jaw. His skin radiated warmth, the stubble coarse against my fingertips, and the weight of the moment crashed over me like a tidal wave. In that instant, I realized that everything had irrevocably changed. As our lips finally came together, there was a moment of hesitation, a gentle, probing kiss that felt as delicate as the stillness enveloping us. But then, as if a great flood had been unleashed, it deepened. It was more than a mere kiss. It was a burst of all that we had kept inside, every word left unsaid, every gaze that lingered, every touch that felt like a spark poised to catch fire. His hands reached for my face. cradling it with a tender yet resolute touch, and I found myself leaning into him, surrendering to the enchantment of the moment. And yet, even as my body yielded, my thoughts surged forward. What was I up to? How had I allowed it to reach this point? Yet, those thoughts slipped away, overwhelmed by the fervor of the kiss, by the way his lips danced against mine, blending urgency with a gentle caress. As we finally separated, the weight of our actions crashed down on me, striking with the force of a tangible impact. I drew back, my breath coming in fits, my heart racing with a thunderous rhythm that echoed in my ears. James's gaze locked onto mine, brimming with a whirlwind of emotions that eluded my understanding, longing, remorse, perhaps even a hint of regret. As I began to speak, the words tangled in my throat, refusing to escape. James extended his hand, a gentle touch that grazed against mine. "It's all right," he murmured gently, even as his voice trembled slightly. "We need not do so. We can pause. Yet, is it possible for us?" Doubt began to creep in, leaving me uncertain. For what seemed like a timeless moment, we remained there, the air around us thick with all the words left unspoken. The storm outside unleashed its fury, the wind wailing as if it sought to rip the very walls asunder, yet within, an unsettling silence enveloped everything. I found myself unable to meet his gaze. I averted my gaze from him entirely. For if I dared to look, I was certain the truth would stare back at me, revealing that what we had just done was an irreversible act. I felt a deep urge to speak, to shatter the stillness, to somehow lift the burden of the moment that had just unfolded. Yet, just as I was about to continue, James interjected once more. "Do you wish you had chosen differently?" he inquired, his voice scarcely rising above a whisper. The question lingered, thick and oppressive, as if it were a weight pressing down on all who dared to breathe. I parted my lips to respond. Yet silence enveloped me. For the reality was, I was in the dark. Uncertainty enveloped me, leaving my emotions tangled, my thoughts scattered, and my words lost in the silence. All I understood was that my reality had transformed in a manner I had not anticipated, and there was no turning back. Before I had the chance to reply,